Dr. Welcome to everyone who is attending right now and everyone who may be watching this later to glean information about this important topic about climate resilience in our farming strategies. So we'll do some introductions and then get into the strategies, including learning lessons from the floods that have impacted our co-facilitators. We'll have a chance for a Q&A and a closing. So we could go to the next slide. All right, so big warm-hearted welcome again to folks who are joining us from the reaches of Turtle Island and beyond. We're so honored to be joined today by Ceci Pineda, who uses they, them pronouns. And Ceci is a brown queer musician, an ecosystem caretaker, and facilitator. And Ceci has a decade of experience collaborating with BIPOC-led community gardens, cultivating food, medicine, and healthy compost piles. Ceci is an avid composter, and shout out to your work, Ceci, with BK Rot and all the incredible ways that you have harnessed food from the waste stream to become the foundation of what we grow in our gardens and farms. Ceci has learned about BIPOC climate resilient farming strategies while supporting farms both in the Northeast and in Puerto Rico. So we're so grateful to have their wisdom and experience to enrich our discussions. And then I also want to welcome Angela and Timothy Brigman, who are joining us from South Carolina. Angela is from a lineage background, Native American to Muskogee Creek tribe. And Timothy's background is in livestock farming as a fourth generation farmer. They currently grow heirloom vegetables and raise heritage breed Berkshire hogs. They reproduce egg layers and currently raise and process heritage breed poultry for meat as well in Cottageville, South Carolina. Angela and Timothy began gardening at their home in the city of Charleston. They relocated their farm to Barnwell, South Carolina, and currently are farming their 10-acre property in a rural area that's not prone to flooding, and they're expanding their farm production. It was after Tim and Angela's daughter's health scare with early puberty, Aaliyah is their daughter's name, they decided to produce their own food, and they acquired new land in rural South Carolina to support those goals. They also produce their own value-added products from the items that they grow and produce, including some award-winning pies that I cannot wait to try. And they participate in various farmers markets selling their farm-raised meats as well as the value-added products. So welcome, Angela, Timothy, and Ceci. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Ceci.
Peace, y'all. It's such an honor to gather with you around this topic. As we explore these strategies, I want us to root in our ancestries and what we know. Building resiliency to climate chaos involves practicing BIPOC farming wisdom. This wisdom is also the basis of regenerative and agroecological farming, permaculture, all those things. And when we hold reverence for soil, water, more than human kin, and our ecosystem, when we care for these beings, we sustain life. And this fundamental aspect of farming not only cultivates resiliency to climate chaos, but it also welcomes carbon back into the soil. So with that said, I'm happy to move us into this first ancestral strategy of observation. If you could go to the next slide. So with observation, it's important for us to be observing what general climate trends are we witnessing in our area. For example, are we experiencing more rainfalls, heavy rains, periods of droughts? Maybe this change between periods of droughts and periods of heavy rain. What does the temperature look like where we are? You know, we're experiencing more and more hot days. Maybe depending on what region we're farming in, we're also experiencing these random cold fluxes because as the wind patterns change, I mean, sometimes air that's in the polar region is going to be coming down to where we farm and giving us frosts in May, or thinking about that winter storm in Texas in 2021, that was also pretty unexpected for them too. It's also going to change the pests and diseases that are around, their life cycles, when they start arriving, the possibility of pathogens also to be among the animals that we take care of. Um, and another thing that I feel like is really important to observe are phenological indicators. So, phenological indicators are the timing of plant and animal life cycles. So, for example, if we're used to seeing lilacs blooming at a certain time, and now we're noticing they start blooming 2 weeks earlier, or when the monarchs start appearing at our farms in their caterpillar stages or in their cocoon phases, if we're noticing the shifts in times, that can also be different indicators of how the natural world around us is adapting to the changes that we're living. And so if we can, you can click again, Bree. We're now going to go into a small reflection exercise of what are we observing. So once again, what climate trends are you witnessing where you grow? And what changes do you notice in the timing of plant and animal cycles? So if you want to take a moment to journal for 1 to 2 minutes, or you can write it down in pen and paper, or if you want to just put it into the chat, please take a moment to share what you're observing where you farm and grow. All right. I hope we'll see these reflections continue to trickle in the chat. Thank you for taking some time, and I guess I want to welcome this practice in general as we go through the farming season. So if you can move through the next slide, Bree. And so I just want to share a few observational tools too, but it's also good for us to start observing. There's national climate assessments that happen every few years. This one's from 2023, but you can see this prediction in how our growing zones are going to change, from what they were to 10 years from now. And having this long-term vision of what's happening can help us do more long-term planning on our farms and think about what types of crops, especially if we're growing, trees or perennials, we want to start planning for that now, but also different annuals. Bree, if you could go to the next slide. And also it gives predictions too, right, of just the water availability that will happen where we are too. Next slide, please. And I want to also just highlight that On a state level, there will also be climate assessments too, and it's what as we're doing our research to see what climate trends, these can always be a little bit more specific. So, for example, in South Carolina, the last one I could find was from 2016, so I'm sure things have changed. But they'll usually have a section talking about agriculture in these assessments, as well as like you can in this paragraph, they didn't mention anything about like floods, but as we know, as Tim and Angela are going to share, there was a lot of flooding that they experienced too. So it's important to read other parts of the reports too, because other parts were mentioning how South Carolina is going to experience more and more flooding too. So as farmers, it's reading more of these snippets of like the report to get the full picture of how things might impact us. Next slide, please. And other tools, observational tools we can have are if we have like our own weather station that we put on the farm and start monitoring too, the temperature changes, wind, rain, etc. And this other sheet from a climate risk assessment tool that we're going to share in a resource handout also encourages like a month to month observing what is happening on our farm, because the more that we can help keep records will help informing our plan from year to year. Next slide, please. And another tool which I really love are cooperative extensions. So these are essentially, I'm not sure if folks are familiar with them already, but it's a great tool available to farmers where in every state there are at least one, but to a few of these like academic extensions, and a lot of them, because climate change is an evolving thing, will develop these tools or have research or different resources that can support farmers specifically to adapting. And so, for example, this on the right is something that came out of the Cornell, where they've compiled a bunch of different things to help you plan and prepare your season for what's happening. So, for example, like when should you schedule your winter cover crops, or what climate change impacts are happening in my region. So depending on how much your local extension wants to dive into this type of research, there'll be different availabilities, but we're again going to show a list to your cooperative extensions in the resource hub for y'all to check that out too. Next slide, please. And so now we're going to get into some of these other strategies. So sorry, Bree, there's a lot of transitions, so if you could just click along as I go, thank you. So thinking about soil and water, our soil health is so important to be adopting different practices and techniques that support soil health, our water quality, and the supply and needs. So with supply and needs, for example, like knowing what your irrigation needs are on a year-to-year basis, and if you're in an area that is at some point going to experience drought, and maybe some years you experience really heavy rainfalls or flooding, you might want to consider expanding your ability to capture supply. So it's not just like for that one year, but it can help you conserve water for the next year over. With soil health, again, soil is the key to life and farming. So thinking about what different practices can we do that help increase the resilience of our soils, like cover cropping or having our soils covered, et cetera. I'm not going to go too deep into these. We'll give you all the chance to do it in breakout groups and be providing other resources for it. It's also really important to think about reducing stressors on our farm. So thinking about pests and disease, again, as we said, pests are going to increase. So having integrated pest management. And with plant growth, this was thinking about more so that like a lot of weeds or guanassas or the plants that we don't intentionally grow, a lot of them are going to take off and have a lot of competition for our different plants. So also how can we be on top of controlling those or having other mitigation weed mitigation to support, and thinking about also our livestock health. The healthier our livestock are, the more they're going to be able to adapt to different stressors that happen, because they're living animals, and having cases of like more extreme heat or different diseases, it's all going to be something that impacts them too. And then emotional resilience. This actually wasn't in the a climate resource that I was looking in, but as farmers, I think it's one of the hardest jobs, like physically, mentally, and emotionally, so draining. And it's already emotionally intensive, and adding the factor of climate chaos that is just throwing curveballs at you from time to time. It's like, how are we taking care of ourselves and our emotional bodies too? How are we connecting to communities and fellow farmers to support us too? Um, Next slide, please, or transition. And preparing for shifts. So you're going to want to think about this in your crop plan. If you're starting to notice that, hey, like my season used to end like the first week of November, we were totally closed down for the farm, but now I'm seeing that I could actually probably get another succession in, including that or starting to adapt that in your crop plan. Um, Also shifting potentially the location of where certain varieties are or your production areas of the farm. And preparing for shifts, again, as we mentioned, the temperature is going to be changing with water. Usually it's like the wet places are going to get wetter, dry places are going to get drier. So just preparing for all these shifts that are coming. Um, and thinking also about long-term impacts. So this is thinking about too, it's like maybe your farm used to receive a certain annual rainfall, but if year after year you're experiencing more intense downpours and rains, that's going to wear on your farm on a long-term basis. So what can you do to support water infiltration or reducing runoff and soil erosion? Or also how can we be integrating other perennials or having forest or different farm infrastructure supporting creating wind buffers as we see an increase in windstorms too. We go to the next slide. This is the most technical part of the presentation, by the way. Afterwards, gets more narrative and breakouty. All right. Also important to think about our farm ecosystem. So, of course, having native plants around is going to add, their own intelligence and resilience. They've adapted to the lands that we've been on for most of us, most likely longer than we've been there. And so relying on their brilliance also to support our farm. Also, as many of us know too, having biological diversity, like we see how badly monocrops do after intense storms or how long it takes them to recover. The more you're able to have diverse crops, even interspersed within like the same bed or growing area, if that's possible, the more they're going to like support each other, or create these kind of like microsystems to be able to be more resilient to what's happening. Connectivity is also huge. And when I say connectivity, it makes me think of mushrooms and fungi in our mycelial network. So how are we supporting life under the soil? How are we supporting plants supporting each other? And a lot of that can be done. And again, the integration of either perennials or compost or wood chips or pre-treating your plants before transplanting them to support mycorrhizal connections, those plant root to mycelial connections too. And then again, community, thinking about our community in how are we supporting each other as farmers, lessons learned, and being building that support network because it's going to be much easier to move through these things when we move through them together. Um, Next, crops and livestock. So when we think about our crops too, again, we went over this a little bit in biological diversity, but diversifying the breeds or varieties we grow and adapting them to, again, we saw that trend of like the growing zones are going to change. So how can we start introducing new varieties to get to know them and see how they do? I feel like I'm such a fan of just like experimenting. We really don't know like sometimes what's going to work or where it's going to work better. So even trying different things out of maybe where you usually grow things and seeing how they do, again, doing like record keeping with that, or even say like growing more seeds than you usually do in your seedlings, and seeing like sometimes it's like maybe some plants aren't going to make it given when you plant them because of an unexpected event, and then you can transplant others. But a lot of like experimenting and trying new things out. And then a really big one that I believe in is saving seed, because the plants that do the best on your farm after a drought or other extreme conditions are ones that have so much intelligence already to them in adapting. So if we're able to save those seeds for the next year, those there we can be supporting their own like adaptation to what's happening on our soils. Next, please. And systems and land. So after a climate event happens too, um, sometimes there's going to be areas that we're like, okay, we can better prepare this area for the next time this disaster is going to happen. But also sometimes a climate disaster is going to happen or a big event, and you're going to be like, actually, like this is so severely altered or like it's not actually sustainable for us to keep trying to do the same thing in this area no matter if we like try to elevate things or etc. Like it's just not going to work here, so that's where we have to learn how to pivot and use different areas of our farm. So it involves this like flexibility and adaptation and being able to like let go, but also assessing like what is worth it, what can I actually invest in, it will make sense to invest in this area to prepare, or where should I just focus on another area of my farm to move what I wanted to be there too. Same with like shifting areas of production. And then last topic we're going to talk about here is infrastructure. So thinking about your water systems, your crop structures, livestock structures. So again, um, wanting to have water systems that are going to be more resilient or allow you to increase how much water you can capture and store to have more available for upcoming years. Um, and with livestock structures, for example, thinking about extreme heat is something that's going to be happening a lot more. So making sure you have adequate like shade and in what you're implementing. And similarly with crop structures, you might want to also think about if we're having these, if you're in areas that have sometimes had these like intense frosts, like thinking about that, like what is something that I can quickly deploy on my crops to like a low tunnel or even cover them with a sheet or something in certain rows. How am I pre-thinking about this and planning it so that if something happens, I have what I need to take care of my crops. Um, all right, I know that was so much information. Can we go to the next slide? Um, so first, I guess I want to make space if anyone has any question on these, and we're about to be going to breakout groups on these topics because I just want to give an overview of things that we want to be thinking about, but there's a lot of different tactics and practices that we can adopt to use. And so that's something that y'all are going to be thinking about more and talking about in your breakout groups. So out of all of these subjects, if you can think about which one is the one you're most interested in talking about and diving into in a breakout group, and just your rename yourself to have the number of that group in front of your name. So again, here we're just taking a moment, yep, to add the number of the group that you want to be in. Let us know if you're having issues with that in the chat. Or as Naima said, if you don't know how to rename yourself, just put the number in the chat.
Ceci, we have a few rooms where it's just one person. I'm wondering if we want to pivot to just doing, maybe just like doing a few rooms and just letting folks speak within those groups on the topics that they want to speak on,
Yeah,
so
I'm
that
seeing that works. I'm seeing like I feel like I'm seeing people like 4, 6, 7, and 9. Um, and I see 3 out there, but 3, I think you're kind of alone. Um, um, let's yeah. I guess Bree, I think that sounds good if we can just start grouping people who are kind of like alike or in um similar areas or similar interests and combining the topics.
Okay, I'm gonna start the rooms. There are a couple of folks unassigned who didn't choose numbers, so we'll have 2 rooms. And then yeah, everybody else can just take a little break for personal reflection.
Yeah, and great. Bree, I have a
Welcome back, everyone. I hope that your conversations in your smaller groups were deep and meaningful. And we would love to give an opportunity for a couple people to share any takeaways with the whole group by coming off mic and sharing into the space. And anyone is welcome to also share some things that were sparked for you, some wisdom gleaned in the chat so that we can, yeah, just be enriched by each other's experience and wisdom. And then Bessie, after that, will share even more strategies with us. So, is there someone that wants to share a takeaway, something that you learned, you want to offer to the big group?
Hello, my name is Mish. Thank you so much for holding this. One of the things I really appreciated in our group was a reminder that we are all in different places, but just how connected and intersected the work that we're doing. I am Gullah Geechee Creole on my father's side and New Orleans, Louisiana Creole on my mother's side. And the person that was speaking was kind of talking about finding their roots, but also about land grabs that are happening and gentrification and displacement. And so I found it really, really helpful. And I talked about the climate safe villages that I'm a part of, and just that we also had someone in the group that was new to this work. Um, and so it was just a nice intergenerational as far as the work. So I really just appreciated the transfer of knowledge and the reinforcement that there are others who are committed to this work and that we're not alone in it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for lifting that up. Yes, despite the geographical distance and the distinctions in our circumstances, we are so connected, and it's really heartening to have that lifted up of how much we're in this together, right? So thank you for that. Does one more person want to flash some knowledge or affirmation into the space?
I just wanted to say it was nice to talk with Molly about sharing, because we share some of the similar soil. And being that the soil that I'm currently farming now is more of a clay soil, she was able to give me some helpful tips to be able to add some practices to how I plant and how to get water to the soil to get to the roots for my plants. So it was really interesting, and I'm glad she's actually in Mexico. And so it was nice to connect with somebody that would have share that same connection on the same type of, almost the same type of soil.
Yes, thank you, Molly. In the spirit of each one teach one, this is what we need. So yeah, I want to invite y'all to continue to share tips, learnings in the chat, and I'm going to pass it back to Ceci, who's going to share some more strategies for adapting to climate impact. Thank you so much.
Bree, can we pop open the slides again, please? I love visuals. They're helpful for me. So I just want to share a few examples that I'm imagining maybe some things came up in y'all's breakout groups too. But in this is a strategy that has been practiced for many years now in areas that are more water scarce, like in the Sahel, in Africa, that region. This is an example in Burkina Faso of zay holes, which is essentially in order to retain more water for crops, they'll dig these holes and they'll put a lot of either compost or biochar or manure, a lot of carbon-rich things in the soil, and then plant there with the idea of creating this habitat where water can collect into these holes and then also trickle down and into the next holes too, to support creating a better environment for their plants. Next slide, please. And then this is an illustration of George Washington Carver, who I see as the father of cover crops and many other things. But cover crops are also an excellent amendment to support water infiltrating into the soils. And they also help for that reason if you either have an abundance of water or a scarcity of water. Cover crops are really a great tool. Also, if we're keeping a great practice is when we're keeping the soil covered, it's preventing the evaporation of water from our soils and allowing water to get further down into the layers too, to act as that reservoir. Next slide, please. A couple of other amendments. Obviously, I love compost, and I'm learning more recently about the magic of biochar. The pictures on the left are from Las Cañadas, a cooperative in Veracruz, Mexico. And if you see that second picture, and that square is like it's showing a microscopic view of biochar, and you can see all of the holes that they have in their structure, or it looks like kind of like a bee comb inside. And so biochar is actually a really excellent amendment to support water infiltration. So again, it supports in times of drought, releasing water back into our soil, or in times of a lot of rain to help capture that water too. And similarly, compost can help the capacity of the soil to retain water from 10 to 20 times its weight. So it's another huge tool in supporting us also in times of drought or times of heavy rain. Next slide, please. I love this ancestral tool, which of chinampas, which were used by Nahuas in central Mexico area, which essentially these are some floating gardens that were created with different structures. But I feel like for me, this feels like a futuristic vision of imagining if we're experiencing more flooding, but they would essentially make these gardens using a lot of different tree matters, and you can see trees planted on the borders of these areas too. But they would use logs and then build on top of the soil. And what makes this, you see in that right picture, what makes that soil look so rich and so dark is that they're actually amending it constantly with the bottom of the river. So that muck, which is so rich in soil, gets created there. But that's another, I feel like, a climate adaptation tool too, ancestral. Next slide, please. Another great practice for that we can implement, especially if we are on a hillside or with more inclination and experience a lot of rainfall or even less, is farming with like contour lines. And in the resource handout we'll share, there's this thing called like an A apparatus, which is an accessible tool you can build to help you draw and shape those contour lines that help water infiltrate down. If we could go to the next slide. I learned of this practice from Las Cañadas in Veracruz, and you can see on the left, it shows all of their elevation and contour lines and how water will move down in the area of where they are, and that helps them plan out of how they're going to then make their contour lines on their farm too. Next slide, please. Puerto Escaleras in Calle, Puerto Rico, they have so many brilliant practices that they implement and adapt. And one that I want to highlight here, they're on a mountainside and will do terrace farming, but they integrate so many different perennials throughout the edges of bed or edges where they're of just having empty or open space. And that creates so many benefits, from water infiltration to having, more beneficial insects come to the area, to providing also shade sometimes for when buffering in cases of extreme heat too. And next slide. This next slide is also from them, and I just want to point out the vetiver, which is a type of perennial bush grass, which they put on the edges of all of their beds and sometimes as a terrace all on its own. But this is a grass that's incredible in supporting erosion. It supports water infiltration. You can also trim the top and add it to the bed so it creates more organic matter. And it can also serve as a wind buffer for your plants too. So really it's like, and once it's established, it'll just keep on continue to grow, and also supports with preventing weeds growing in those areas. So multiple benefits, and we could probably find crops that are similar to this to take on that role. Next slide, please, Bree. This is beloved Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York, and to show an example of around navigating the long-term impact of a lot of wind. And so Soulfire is nestled in the middle of a forest, and so the trees provide this natural buffer to a lot of wind getting in, and the wind can filter through the area. We also see perennials in different structures. Next slide, please. And if we don't have that beautiful privilege of being surrounded by a forest, there's ways that we can adapt our infrastructure to be wind buffers too. My friend Disha sent me these, another farmer, sent me these pictures of a high tunnel, which was created specifically to also support being a wind buffer. You'll see like that left side is higher and tilted. And so that's where it was designed, because they get such strong winds coming from that side. So the wind passes over and then it ventilates through the greenhouse. And they also have a lot of reinforcement in the bars that are placed throughout the greenhouse tunnel, so it won't get swayed over by the wind. But we can also be thinking about, how do we adapt our farm infrastructure for these things too. Next slide, please. And I think this is one of the last ones, but I love these pictures or visuals too of some example of community created calendarios, which take into account what's happening in our growing season, as well as like what's happening in our natural environment around us. So this is something that we can create in our communities or on our farms, but really trying to be more observant, as we were talking about before, of like what's happening in the timing of plants and animals around us, and starting to create that calendar for ourselves, which helps us in our own crop planning, because climate change is not going to recognize calendar dates. And the better indicators that we're going to have in the season or when to start is actually going to be how our local environment is adapting to what's happening around us. Like, we can definitely use that as information, as a tool So I think for this, it gets down to a lot of observation, speaking to our elders, building with local indigenous communities to understand what has been in the past, or when do these phenomena usually happen, and what do they correlate to, and what and how we're growing. And again, in the resource handout, I'll share a link to a webinar where they talked about creating these calendarios in different communities, working with communities in Mexico and also in British Columbia. And next slide. So this is a reflection for y'all for later, but just thinking about what is a technique or practice you want to learn more about and implement. I hope you leave after the end of this space kind of thinking about what's something that, I know it might be overwhelming to hear a bunch of things, but maybe it's like, what's one thing that I was inspired by in my breakout groups or that came up in our time together, or in the conversation that's about to come to, that we can think about too. And next slide, please. The last strategy that we didn't talk about or going to breakout groups because it's what's coming next, is thinking about disasters and worst case scenarios. So this is something that we also have to prepare for, and thinking about insurance for our crops or livestock or our farms, infrastructure and safety plan. And I was going to leave it just at that because Tim and Angela have a wealth of knowledge and experience on this. So I'll pass it over to Naima and them for this next part.
Wow, thank you so much, Ceci, for compiling so many strategies and ideas from various places to share with us here. That was incredibly meaningful and helpful. And yes, a lot of content. Have no fear. We're all going to get the recording, the slides, the resources to support us in continuing to reflect and dive deeper. And now we're going to move into the incredible blessing of learning from Angie and Tim and their direct experience. We are so honored to have you both, multi-generational farmers that grow heirloom vegetables and raise heritage breed animals to provide for their community in South Carolina. So Angie and Tim's family farm suffered severe flooding last year from Hurricane Debbie. And then, y'all, they were hit with a second flood just 3 months later while still in that recovery process. So we are holding immense compassion for your loss and all that you've had to navigate in the aftermath of these floods, Angie and Tim. And we're so grateful to you for sharing from your experience to other farmers and land stewards here as we prepare for the unknown and the inevitable impacts of climate chaos. So thanks again for being here. And we're going to flow conversation style, kind of like an interview. So I have some questions for y'all, and you can share a little bit for each question, and then we'll go from there. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. So to start, if y'all would be down to share what your experience of going through the first flood was like, and then how that prepared you for the second.
Well, for the first flood, we realized how unprepared we were for a lot of the things that happened, the flooding, just the sheer impact of the water, dealing with a lot of livestock, animals, our plants, everything from, home to dealing with insurance companies and just not being prepared. From the first flood to the second flood, we learned that, we changed up the way we housed and dealt with our animals. We switched our housing to a dock style housing, which we did lightweight housing with dock floats underneath to rise with the water to keep our chickens from drowning and our pigs and everything from drowning. We did false floors on the coops to deal with airflow and strap the water containers to the sides to rise with them. Um, Prepared food in advance that could be set in, so we would have at least a week's supply of food for the animals. We infrastructure wise, anything that wasn't, cemented down, we raised 3 feet into the air, to prepare for any other floods, which, like you said earlier, 3 months later, we got a chance to test out a lot of what we did because it flooded again.
Hmm.
So we did a lot better on the second flood than we did on the first. We didn't lose any animals on the second flood. Um, we didn't lose any of our infrastructure or equipment because we were prepared and had everything raised higher into the air. Just a lot better prepared.
Wow, it sounds like in a short amount of time that y'all have so many lessons learned to apply. I'm impressed that you were able to implement those changes so quickly. Yeah. Hmm. Would y'all be willing to share a little bit more about what that experience was like for you personally, what the mental and emotional process of rebuilding has been like, how it was for, the animals that you've been caring for and this land that you've been caring for, to go through that disaster?
Yeah, I will say the first flood, when you wake up in the middle of the night and you notice the water is rising and you don't have an idea of when it's going to stop. My first concern was the animals. We were earlier that day when the water was rising, not too high, but it was still about ankle deep. We began to put a lot of the chickens up, just to keep them, dry and, not to get so wet and to be prone to sickness. So we did put a lot of them up. However, the hogs, we didn't think that it was going to be of that issue. So we were, we're in a relaxed mind that, okay, we've put we put most of the chickens up on higher ground. And so everything would be okay. But in the middle of the night, when I woke up and I noticed that the water has risen almost to our doorstep, it was a panic mode. Now you go into fight or flight. And I could hear our hogs squealing. And because it was dark, I couldn't physically see them, but I could hear them. And I'm like, okay, well, they're okay. They're okay. They're still alive. But when you don't know if you're going to drown, you first think about emotionally, you're thinking about, we got to save ourselves. But we were also concerned about the animals as well. So we were able to reach out and contact other fellow farmers, our friends, and see if they were able to assist us in rescuing the hogs before it was to the point that where they, had drowned. By that morning, chickens, they don't stay in place. It's kind of hard to control a chicken because naturally they want to go and drink. They want to go down to their housing units because that's what they were accustomed to, going in for the night. And so with that, we lost a lot of them because they went back down. Broilers, they jumped back down off higher ground to want to go back into their housing units, not knowing the dangers of the water. The egg layers were in the treetops and on above rooftops, treetops. So they had a more sense of knowing how to go up and stay up above ground. But it's just it was an emotional wreck the next day. It really was. First, we just wanted to save our animals. And when we were able to get back to the property, to the farm, and just account for the damage and the livestock there, it was heart-wrenching because, you know, a lot of them, we were basically cleaning up a lot of dead poultry. And our poultry has, the egg layers, they really weren't the same after that. The stress of everything. So they stayed in a state of flight. So they never really came back to a sense of feeling natural to go back into their safety net of being in their housing unit. So at night, they retreated back to the trees, the rooftops. So it was hard. It was hard. And to just have to start with our broilers all over again from scratch, because a lot of them, with them being in contact with the river water, they got sick. And we relocated once the water had subsided and dried out. We did relocate the animals to a different section of the farm that was higher and not as lower. But we still couldn't get the poultry to be able to come at ease to come around. You know, like I said, the stress on the animals was great. And we didn't know what to do to be able to help take that away from them. You know, I think once they were traumatized about the flood water, which it was their first time experiencing that as well. Their natural environment is dry. And for them to have to experience something like that, they just never really returned back to their normal selves. They stopped laying eggs. Their behavior was different. We were treating our animals with medications to overcome the diseases that they picked up from being inside the flood waters. The broilers that we had were no longer for meat, you know.
Yeah.
So it wasn't, it felt, it was, it was, it was a great loss. Um,
Hmm. Thank you, Angela, for sharing and like really taking us there with you. That is a tremendous loss. And I imagine how stressful, yes, for the birds, the hogs, and also for you all, you know,
mm,
navigating something so shocking and unexpected that requires so much rapid response too, right? Like no time to kind of mourn. You're just like in action. What do we do? What do we do? Yeah.
mhm.
Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah, my heart goes out to you, and it makes me wonder, like, especially in the context where this flood is impacting multiple farmers and lands around, like, what did mutual aid look like? Did you have people to come and support you, like neighbors or other people? And um, yeah, what was meaningful in terms of support beyond you all?
Oh, it was very meaningful for our community. And you know, we weren't the only ones that were affected.
Hmm.
Um, Along our whole highway stretched, families were affected, but everyone band together to help one another. Like I said, our farmer friends, they came, they helped rescued our Berkshire hogs, and they allowed them to stay on their farm for us until we were situated or until we were ready to send them to the processing. So they were very kind.
We had other farmer friends that were helping to donate birds for us to start our flocks back over. They let us use a lot of their equipment. They, donated supplies, just everything that they could do to help. And at the same time, we tried to help, some of the other people that were affected too while we were going through our situation.
Yeah. We did have a GoFundMe page to help us rebuild the farm. And we have met our goal and from the love and compassion from our customers, our friends, our neighbors, we were able to, in that time span of bouncing back and getting supplies and rebuilding. So within that short period of time of when we had the second flood. So, we were prepared the second time around, because of having the extra hand and help, with the, we've had the community reach out to help us restore the farm, clean, volunteer, all of those things. And it's just real important to know your resources.
Yeah.
Because I called like the fire department at first to find out who could help us move these animals. So we have like almost 400 birds. How do we move?
Wow.
How do we move all of them?
How do you catch them?
Yeah.
Because all our birds pastured, so they would be out everywhere. One of the most touching things for me was we had farmers from kind of everywhere through our breeding seeds cohort come together, and they came to the farm and they helped us rebuild fences. They helped us build coops, and just loved on us and everybody to, kept us positive and kept us, going forward as farmers. Because we had our doubts at one moment, but yeah, it just felt good having them to come and show support.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Shout out to the power of community and mutual aid. And yes, big gratitude to Creating Seeds, fellows and farmers coming together. I'm so glad that was able to happen. And shout out to Sarah, who's on the call, who's on the meeting, for just your care and support. Really, really grateful. So I have one more kind of loaded question for you before we turn into the Q&A and allow other people to ask questions. But yeah, Tim, I know you have a background on preventative maintenance already, and so want to glean from your background as well as this particular experience last year about what it really means to be prepared for the unimaginable. Like what kind of emergency systems you would recommend others have in place, whether it's around evacuation plans or generators or how to relocate animals, things that you have learned that are really important to include in a farm disaster plan. And both of y'all are welcome to add ideas to this. But yeah, how would you advise other farmers?
One of the things that I learned, and it brought back up from being preventative maintenance, is having a plan together. ahead of time, just like having a hurricane plan together. We didn't think of it before, but having a plan for our animals and equipment and everything, getting together all the numbers for resources that you need, being prepared for clean water, clean edible food for your animals. We even put together a few makeshift livestock trailers that we didn't have before that would have helped us, and having those prepared with extra food and water set up, so in case we did have to relocate everybody, we had a good clean place to have our animals, whether it be getting them to another farmer's land, or just having them with us to go to family. um, really paying attention to the climate and weather. We've learned to do that a lot more. Like we said, just having that plan together ahead of time is more important than you think.
And I would also add to about the insurance. We didn't have insurance. So we built our farm and everything we produce from our hardworking hands. Whatever money that came in is what went exactly out to build. And it would really be you would really have some sort of peace of mind knowing that if you can afford it, farm insurance, because the livestock that we lost, so we lost 200 broilers. That was income lost. Egg layers stopped laying. That was income lost. Equipment that we lost that flooded out, that was income lost. And having that insurance would reimburse you for not only will we have our home insurance. If that was a total loss, we would have been compensated for that. But because we didn't have farm insurance, we weren't compensated for our farm materials, farm supplies. And like I said, our livestock and whatever vegetables we had already started growing. So the insurance, matter of fact, we spoke with an insurance agent who has a package deal that would include home, farm supplies, livestock, income loss, all with that in that package. And so I wanted to say it is very important to try to reach out and find and have that insurance on hand, because if it's your livelihood and you don't have a backup job and your farm is your only income, that makes a difference a whole lot in how quickly you could bounce back.
Yes, that is huge. Wow, this advice is golden. Thank y'all so much for sharing. And I want to give space for anyone else who has questions to also add to our conversation. Questions for Tim and Angie or for Ceci. We'll take the remaining time we have together to open it up. And you can feel free to come off mute and speak, or if you're not in a place where you can speak, you can put it in the chat and I'll read it out loud.
I have a question. I'm curious about like your new place and sort of like what things you had in mind in respect to like after going through all this experience, like maybe like what you were looking for, or like what are some like really important things that you centered in your planning and that sort of thing.
Well, the number one thing we was looking forward is to what rivers are around us. We wanted to be sure that we were in a great amount of distance from rivers, which when we purchased the first time, we were so excited to be by the Edison River, because we're outdoor nature people, we go kayaking, and tubing down the river, but however, it didn't work for our farm. So we wanted to make sure that where our farm now wasn't going to be susceptible to flash floods.
Yeah, we did a lot more research this time on what was kind of expected, what the area has gone through, what kind of what they expect to go through within the next couple of years. We just spent more time. We didn't go for just the glitz and this area just looks good or this is a nice looking house. We actually did our research this time to see what kind of things affect the area.
Yeah, actually, I think it was, I can't remember quite exactly, but I was looking through the information on my phone and it was telling me about the severity, if there were floods and if there was fires, if the area is prone to fires, floods, windstorm. It did say that it is high winds here. But that's something we can sort of deal with. We could work around if it gets very windy. And so the chances of flooding was very low. Fires, because they did have it did also have like a predictable for the next 5 years of what we would probably be expecting weather-wise. So that was an interesting app on the weather app to be able to say for the area of Barnwell, which is about an hour and 15 minutes out from where we originally were living.
Okay.
To
Thank
get
you for
that
that.
information. Yeah.
That's so helpful. Mali offered a question in the chat that I want to lift up if y'all are down to answer it in like 2 minutes, and then we can do our closing. Mali asked, what changes to the farm worked best? So given that, you went through the first flood and then made all of these adaptations, from those, like what were the ones that worked best? And then after experiencing a second flood, what do you think you can still improve upon and learn from?
I think what worked best for us because of livestock farming was the floating coop and raising our infrastructure to a higher level. That helped us tremendously. During the second flood, like we said, we got a chance to test it out. We didn't lose anything on the second flood because our buildings were set higher and our coop with our chickens in it floated with the water instead of just getting flooded out. And as the water receded, it dropped right back down to the ground the way it was supposed to.
Amazing. Truly.
I will say my okra survived the flood. I was shocked, but my okra plant, I still had a couple of okra plants, and when it got flooded out again, I was very surprised that it survived.
Oh my goodness. Okay, okra. Now we know
Yeah.
that I'm a resilient crop. This is gonna lie. That's
Yeah.
good.
I think the okra plant is resilient.
Oh, that inspired me. Oh.
However, we did notice now, I will say, coming into spring, we noticed, and I'm not sure if it's because of all the nutrients that flushed through the soil and the land. A lot of our trees really took off. this spring,
Mm.
like really huge growth.
Wow.
So what took like, and that I did notice a difference. A few, like our plum tree, our grape orchard, and our blueberries, our wild blueberries. Oh my God, they came back with a vengeance this year.
Hmm.
So because of that flood, I think it brought in a lot of nutrients for, because we're in sandy soil, to our trees and bushes and plants and stuff like that. Because they really took off.
Wow, that's inspiring to hear. And I pray the same for y'all, that even though this was an unthinkable and horrible disaster, that in some ways, like, you are fortified with more nutrients, more water that allows you to grow in ways that you hadn't been able to before, and that your community is strengthened, that your resolve is strengthened, and that your really deeply sacred work may be strengthened from here on out.
Thank you.
So thank y'all so much for sharing your experience with us. This was like deeply meaningful. And Sassy, again, thank you so much for the really, really powerful resources and strategies that you shared with us. Sassy has compiled some resources into a document so we can like go even deeper as we plan for the times to come. And as we close, I just want you to be thinking to yourself, what is one thing that you're going to lean into or activate following this workshop based on what you heard so far? So just take a moment to reflect to yourself on one step, one thing that you want to activate. Mm. I want to thank you again for being part of this workshop, part of this extended community. And we know that one of the major aspects of climate resilience is our relationships. It's how we look out for each other, how we know each other, how we have each other's back. So let's continue to really strengthen the ties that will support us through all types of change so that we can continue to evolve and strengthen. So grateful to be in community with you all and wishing you many blessings and safety and health in the days to come. Thanks so much. And shout out to Bree for co-coordinating this series and for holding down tech. Brianna, we're so grateful for you, for all the love you pour into the Skillshares. And we hope that you'll be back with us. We have many more offerings coming up this year. Feel free to come off mute and make a joyful sound as we depart. Good to see
Bye.
y'all.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
Bye,
you.
all. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Mhm.
Thanks so much, Tim and Angie, for sharing your story. So moving.
Thank you. Thank you.